I brought this up earlier, and you mentioned that there's 100 beds being built in Limerick at the moment. On the 13th to the 7th, 56 patients on trolley in one area in the regional hospital with capacity for 20 patients. This has increased to 40. Some patients are sitting on chairs, no social distance, staff exposed. The INMO have asked for an internal investigation. My question to you is, we're building 100 beds in Limerick, which is welcomed. From all the hospitals that we have around the country, if you have to work them into areas, why have we got such a high turnover of nursing staff and consultants within the hospital system? Why is that? And is there certain hospitals that have a high turnover of staff? And are they leaving because of the work conditions that they're being forced to work in?
So, firstly, in terms of staff turnover, I mean, staff turnover does vary by type of staff. Actually, consultant staff doesn't turn over at a very high rate. I think nursing staff actually has a higher rate. And when you ask about what are the specific trends, there's definitely a trend from Dublin to the rest of the country, which is very visible in both acute and community services. That's often about facilitating a return to a home base. The comment in terms of Limerick specifically and your observations on trolleys, I mean, overall, actually, paradoxically, trolley numbers in the country have been greatly reduced. They're at 86 today, but there are specific, and they would have been at over 400 this time last year, but there are specific...
I'm asking about Limerick.
There are specific challenges presenting in Limerick and one or two other sites. The query about the infection risk, I think you will find that in many instances what is now counted as a trolley is in fact a single area, sometimes equivalent to a room with a proper door and walls, and the infection risk is being managed. The trolley is being counted in the same way as before, but the environment and the location is different, and at times outpatient space is being used, which of course is compromising our outpatient capacity.
Some patients are sitting on chairs. That's not a trolley, it's not a bed, and it's not a room with a door. Again, why is Limerick numbers always higher? Is it because they're covering Tipperary, Clare, North Cork, and that you probably haven't got the adequate staff to do this?
I think the region has a population, I think, about 381,000. So, and it's recognised, and was indeed pre-COVID, that the bed capacity in Limerick isn't sufficient to the demand, and the additional beds, including the 60-bed block, are intended to partly address that. Of course, hospital capacity on its own won't be successful at that. We need significant additional investment, which is a part of what our winter planning process is about, in community services and in GP and GP support services.
Midwest hospitals have offered to help. This has to come from management, isn't that correct? That if the hospitals have offered to help with the overflow, this has to come from management.
Yes.
So if we look at other hospitals, and I asked this around this room here earlier today, if we look at other hospitals and the management of other hospitals around the country, is there certain areas in certain hospitals that we might have a small problem with management of the systems rather than the hospital systems, that there might be a problem around management and asking for help?
A problem about asking for help, Deputy. I think certainly in the context of the UL group, there's a very strong management focus on addressing the challenge. That, in fact, is what's giving rise to the current investment with strong clinical input as well as a general managerial input. To your question about does the nature of management vary across the country, of course at some level yes, but from our point of view I think the key determinants, if you look at the trend in Limerick over the period of COVID, Limerick was probably the only area in the country where there was very little fall off in attendances at emergency department, which suggests that there's a demand pattern, which you referred to in a way earlier yourself, that is putting Limerick University hospitals under a lot of strain. So, of course, we have to continue to invest in and develop management across the whole country. But I think if you look, you will find that there are also real demand-supply issues, and Sláinte Care has been clear about that, and that does vary across.
Another question here for you. From the the employing of consultants, and I've said this earlier again, not in the Dáil, where we have no Ehlers-Danlos syndrome consultant. 2 years, I think they're looking to replace Ehlers-Danlos syndrome consultant. When will we have one? And the second question I have for you, and you can answer both together, is for PPE gear. If we do have another outburst. I have brought this to the HSE and I've brought it to the government. There is a company within Limerick that produce PPE gear, and they're in talks with the HSE about putting in a machine into their factory unit, which will employ 40 extra jobs in Limerick and will be self-contained from a manufacturing point of view for PPE gear for ongoing. That not only does it increase jobs, but it means that we have a constant supply of PPE gear if there is another pandemic, which will mean that the HSE will have their PPE gear at a cost neutral after 3 years. Could you please, this has been on the table and has been brought to the Dáil and has been brought to the HSE, but yet there is no, it needs to happen now. For if the pandemic happens, it needs to be put in place. And it's a common sense approach, and it's all done within the Irish system. Manufacturing, all raw materials will be produced on site, so we will never be without masks again like we were before.
So with regard to the individual consultant, if I can revert to the committee with a response to that, I will do. I'm not aware of the particular post. In terms of PPE, I mean, clearly it's a matter of national concern and priority that we would have some manufacturing base. While it's not the HSE's role specifically, I do understand that as part of our industrial development and promoting business in the country, it would make a lot of sense to have a domestic supply. And so from our point of view, we would certainly be interested in that. We don't, obviously, as an organisation, engage directly in funding or sponsoring commercial entities, but we would have a strong interest in domestic supply in light of our recent history in accessing PPE. I understand that there are dialogues taking place in other areas nationally which are looking at prioritising that as an area for development. And certainly our own procurement function, which has worked both with domestic and international suppliers, would be very keen and I think are part of that dialogue. So I'm not aware of the individual company, but again, I will certainly refer it back to our own procurement people. I'm sure they are aware.
Is it? He said I think he did not say he'd provide a reply to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Donoghue. The next speaker.